In Sudan, it appears that more people are still incredibly vulnerable. The conflict there appears to continue between two different military groups. One is the National Army, the other called the Rapid Support Forces, which appears to be wanting to be integrated into the main army. It also looks like a power struggle between two generals who are trying to get political power and access to resources. Clayson Monyela is the Deputy Director General for Public Diplomacy for our Department of International Relations and Cooperations. Clayson, good afternoon to you. Firstly, are there many South Africans in Sudan at the moment? Are they in danger?
Well, everyone who is in Sudan right now is facing some uncertainty. This is why the message that we send out to South African nationals who are in Sudan is to stay indoors and not venture into going out into the streets because it is very dangerous. There's intense fighting. And the most challenging part about this fighting is that there's also airstrikes. You would have seen in the news that the EU and the Americans were also attacked yesterday. So most embassies, including the South African embassy, is not operational because diplomats are also staying indoors to avoid the fighting that's going on. So we've received a number of calls from families here at home, members who are or stranded in Sudan. But for now, there is really not much that can be done because the airport is closed. There is essentially a no-fly zone. Hospitals have been damaged. It is impossible to move around. We are, of course, exploring all options as government so that when the situation allows, we can move in and evacuate our nationals.
I mean, this is the thing. You'll want to get the South Africans out. If the airport's closed, that's very, very difficult to do. You basically have to wait for the fighting to stop.
Essentially, this is why, if you saw the statement that we issued echoing what the African Union, the United Nations, the regional body, IGAD, has also said, is that we're calling for a ceasefire, even if it's 24, 72 hours, to allow humanitarian aid, to allow the people who are injured and those who want to get out. That's all we're asking for right now. We're calling for that. Of course, the bigger message is to call for the two warring parties to agree to negotiations, because we maintain the principle that political problems are best resolved through dialogue. Fighting only leads to devastation, destruction of infrastructure, killing of people. That's not what we want. You would recall the African Union has this goal of silencing the guns on the African continent. So that's what we are calling for as South Africa.
Are we in direct contact with any of the sides? I know the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, spoke to, in fact, the leaders of both sides in this conflict yesterday. Are we going directly or are we going through the African Union?
Well, in addition to the efforts of, because we've got an embassy there, our ambassador is on the ground, but we're supporting largely the efforts of the IGAD, the regional body. As you have seen, they've dispatched 3 heads of state to intervene and mediate and appeal for the two warring parties to agree to negotiations. So we are supporting those efforts. The African Union is doing the same. And we're hoping that at some point sanity will prevail and there will be an agreement for, at least in the interim, a ceasefire of sorts so that we can attend to the people who are stranded, particularly those who are injured. Hospitals have also been damaged. There's over 180 civilians that have been killed in this process. We can't allow this to continue.
And Clayson, if I may just ask you, there's been confirmation Japan deciding not to invite South Africa to the G7 summit, the invitation going to the African Union instead. Lots of different ways to see this. I've seen some commentary claiming this is because of our stance on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Do you see it like that? Is this a rebuke for our stance on that?
No, I think this has been exaggerated. South Africa is not a member of the G7. We are a member of the G20. That's where we participate because we're a full member. In fact, the only African country that is in the G20. We get invited to the G7 occasionally, depending on who the host is in a particular year. They do what they call they reach out to certain countries depending on the agenda of the day. They would invite certain countries. This time around, Japan has a particular issue that affects their region. So they are mostly inviting countries in their region. From the continent, they've just invited the chair of the African Union, which is Comoros. So this is nothing unusual. We are not a member of the G7. We've not attended all G7 summits. It depends on who's hosting and what issue they'd like to discuss, and they will have these regional breakaways and invite certain countries.
Clayson Monyela, do appreciate the time. Thank you, Deputy Director General for Public Diplomacy at the Department of International Relations and Cooperation.